This is Ivan Russo from University of Verona, Italy, and I'm very happy to discuss with you the main results of our research about reverse flows. The team, the international team, was composed by Professor Ayman Omar from American University. Hi, Ayman. And from Professor Daniel Pellath from Grand Valley State University. So our research was under the umbrella of reverse flows. So reverse flows today are a critical part of overall supply chain management in manufacturing industry. To be success in managing reverse flow, allow company to do what? To reduce, for example, operating cost, to improve customer satisfaction, and also to drive profitability, to improve marginality. So it's not a surprise for us to understand that manufacturing are very interested and focused to improve their reverse supply chain operations. And for this reason, they are looking for third-party logistics provider to manage these operations. However, outsourced reverse supply chain operation can be a major source, and we saw that a major source of problems, frustration for manufacturers, and also for 3PS. Why? Because from one side, manufacturing failing to communicate expectation of what they expecting from 3PS, and 3PS failing to explore truly innovative solutions. So it's clear today that it's not, a surprise that reverse supply chain operations are important. And they need companies, manufacturers, they need to find on 3PS to provide new service, innovative service, and or the right solution for manufacturers. In fact, what they don't know, the companies, they don't know is how to ensure that the decision they make when managing this engagement will generate results, and what kind of results. So the goal of our research and the paper, if you wish to read, is to explore the how and when, the mechanism and the context of managing outsourced reverse supply chain operation. We did it through 4 case studies in different regions, Europe and North America, because we saw a problem in the real world. So companies still lack a clear understanding of how and when specific reverse supply chain activities lead to certain outcomes, to certain results, and how to structure outsourcing engagement to achieve desired outcomes and results. So our goal is, again, was to investigate pair dyadic, so a manufacturer and a 3PS, and we did it with 4 cross-case analysis, and we tried to understand how the different outcomes change through the different approaches to managing outsourcing reverse supply chain operations.
So with as Ivan mentioned earlier, that we were focused on 4 dyads, 2 based in the United States and 2 based in Europe. Our focus was looking at how they were managing the operations and what kind of outcomes were each one of those entities getting from those operational structures. We examined, and we were wondering about what would be the appropriate industries to focus on. And our decision was to examine the electronics and consumer goods industries for this research for a variety of reasons. But before I get into that, I just wanted to explain that we had 2 paired dyads in the United States and 2 paired dyads in Europe. Those dyads included the manufacturer company plus the third-party service provider for their returns, reverse operations, and remanufacturing. The focus on those industries was due to the fact that 20% of consumer electronics and consumer goods in the United States are returned. So that's a significant amount of operations that are involved now in the reverse component. In addition to that, this industry now represents almost $20 billion of sales or amount of money that's being handed back and forth. And we wanted to examine differences across different regions due to the fact that in Europe, there are more stringent regulations that are put on manufacturing companies to manage and deal with returned products. So we wanted to examine also those differences in place. And for that, we had the dyads both in the United States and in Europe. Our research included 24 interviews across those 4 dyads. We started asking supply chain managers at each participating firms and then proceeded using a snowball effect. So asking the managers who else should we talk to afterwards. Those interviews lasted between 60 to 120 minutes. In addition to the interviews, we had follow-up calls. We looked at additional secondary resources, industry reports, and other data that could have been helpful for us. Interviews or the interviews included on-site visits. That's represented almost 60% of this. And eventually we continued analyzing and examining the data until we realized there was no additional findings emerging from this. And for the data analysis part, I'll move on to Dan Pellath.
So the most important finding that we found that came out of this research was a really strong connection between a manufacturer's willingness to hand over control of their 3PL of their outsourced kind of reverse operations over to the 3PL partner. So we found that, for instance, companies that were more willing to hand over control of their operations to their 3PL partner ended up with having more innovation-oriented solutions, ended up with having more solutions that were focused on opportunities, spotting opportunities to change and to make an impact in terms of the competitive market. Whereas companies that retain control, largely retain control of their reverse operations, the 3PL engagement typically would focus then around operational efficiency and cost reduction, right? So 2 quite very different sets of outcomes based on how manufacturers decided to manage those engagements. But the key thing here is that there are a lot of steps between when a company begins thinking about how they start to, whether or not they're willing to cede control of their operations, to what actually comes out to be the outcomes in the end. There are a lot of steps, and it's a process that happens over time through interaction with the 3PLs. And there are factors that impact that process, right? So the main kind of relationship between ceding control of an operation and outcomes is there, but there are a lot of steps that go into actually how that process plays out. And some of the kind of main factors that we saw in terms of impacting that process included things like a company's understanding of what kind of value reverse logistics could provide for them and their customers. Also, what kind of governance structures that the manufacturer put in place to manage the relationship. And then finally, also, there were actions on the part of the 3PL that changed the manufacturer's view, had the potential to change and kind of expand the manufacturer's willingness to give over control to the 3PL. So there are a lot of factors there. And one of the important findings of this research is that that main relationship, although there, has to be caveated, has to be thought of in terms of a kind of contingent terms that along each step of the process, it could go a different way. So there are choices along each step of that process.
One future implication that I'm sure that it's interesting to investigate is to understand, for example, in different economic change and business change, how the new omni-channel strategies across the supply chain could set up, because we have a reverse flow that impact offline, online, distribution channel. So it could be interesting to investigate the role that reverse supply chain operations play in providing customer with a different experience across different channels. So interesting is also to have different different research or I mean different understanding different results, not just from satisfaction or operational outcomes, but also to examine alternative measure of performance, for example, financial performance, how this fit or misfit of a relationship between 3PL and manufacturer can improve the financial outcomes from the dyadic or from a company or from supply chain as a whole. It was a big pleasure to work with Dan and Ivan for two reasons. First, because it's a long relationship that I had with them and the different universities, and this is a great value for research to work with different universities around the world. And second, because I learned a lot from them, and I hope so that we have other opportunities to work together, because the value to see different business contexts in Europe and North America can create a great value for new supply chain challenges in research. So our analysis basically revealed a clear association between a manufacturer willingness to seek control over its reverse supply chain activities in operation and the primary outcomes of the outsourcing engagement. So we have several, managerial implications behind that. First of all, the findings suggest that the manufacturer interaction with its 3PLs and the evolution of the outsourcing engagement over time may influence outcomes or results more than the starting point of the outsourcing engagement. So in other words, learning may influence outcomes more than the choice of any initial approach or predetermined approach. Second, manager will need to be very carefully about consider the fit between desired outcomes and willingness to cede control. Why? Because achieving a fit between these two elements may be a critical determinant of the success of the relationship, while a lack of fit may create problems, conflict, inefficiency. From our research, so the cases that we analyze clearly attest to the critical role of reverse supply chain operation. And that's particularly in the context of managing supply chain complexity. So today we have an environmental that is very complex. So it's necessary to adapt, to understand the right condition to manage the outsourcing across the reverse supply chain. So we are sure a lot of opportunities also for future research.
So one of the things that, particularly in terms of the academic side of things, is that a lot of academic research tends to focus on demonstrating pretty straightforward or simple relationships, and tends to shy away from including much of the complexity and the contingency that goes into real-world decision-making. This research is somewhat different in that regard. We really leaned into trying to understand that complexity and that process through which the decision-making happens, and how you get from an initial stage of having an initial set of presumptions, a manufacturer having an initial set of presumptions or ideas about reverse logistics and the value that reverse supply chain operations can bring, to how they actually manage the relationship and ultimately get to goals. And out of that also, there's an important point to take away, which is that there are a lot of different ways in which companies can manage their reverse operations, and not any one of those is necessarily better than the other. So the relationships that we looked at were all quite stable, and reports from the interviews told us that there's really strong collaboration and really strong kind of trust that had been built up across these companies, regardless of whether or not they were innovation focused or whether or not they were efficiency focused. And so that tells us that, collaboration and strong relationships can lead to multiple different kinds of outcomes, and it shouldn't be assumed that collaboration alone is going to have a specific type of outcome. And there too, it starts to kind of create a kind of more complex, a more nuanced story of the collaboration research that has dominated a lot of supply chain management research.
One more word about this, because we demonstrate also how reverse supply chain operation is part of the logistics customer service. And that it's really important for company to understand the success of their performance, of their action. Also, it's moving through a good established outsourcing relationship with third-party logistics. And so it's a way for us to move forward a new action to establish a competitive advantage for companies also in this emerging area across the supply chain.
I'd like to add just one more point to follow on Dan's last comment about the how each relationship and how it was managed differently, and that led to different outcomes. We approached this research trying to look at ways and investigate ways where companies work with their third-party providers to better understand best practices. And what we realized is there was not one size fits all. There was not one magic solution for managing that relationship. The key part for organizations to understand is what is the value proposition that they hope to achieve from working with their third-party providers, specifically in that context of reverse supply chain operations. What exactly is it that they're looking for? And accordingly, how should they structure that relationship and how should they manage that relationship to achieve those outcomes? And I think, in my opinion, that is the significant contribution from our research. That's something that was not intuitive for us going into the research, and we were glad to find this as we analyzed the interviews and data.